Well, good afternoon, everyone. Cynthia Tomaine once again with Interactive Brokers, and thank you for joining today's webinar being brought to us by Toggle. Our topic today is man and artificial intelligence. Are they trading friends or foes? And with us this afternoon, I'm very pleased to have Jan Szilagyi with Toggle. Jan is the CEO and co-founder of Toggle, a fintech startup that aims to level the playing field for for discretionary investors. He's spent most of his career with Stanley Druckenmiller at Duquesne Capital as an analyst and global macro portfolio manager. He has been most recently co-chief investment officer for global macro strategies at Lombard Odier and a global macro portfolio manager at Fortress Investment Group prior to that. Jan has completed his economics PhD at Harvard under Ken Rogoff and holds a BA and an MA degree in mathematics and economics from Yale. So with that, I want to thank Jan for joining us here this afternoon. Jan, I'm going to go ahead and pass you the controls. We'll make you the presenter. If you can share your screen, we'll get underway here this afternoon. Thanks for joining us, Jan, and welcome.
Perfect. Thank you very much. Hello and welcome, everybody. Let me just pick the correct screen here. I think we have it. All right.
Looks
Everybody
good.
Should be able to see the screen. Excellent. Okay, Cynthia, thank you very much for this introduction. Again, welcome everybody. Thank you for taking the time to go through this presentation with us. We'll try to make it as interactive and relevant to your current investing and trading style as possible. What I do want to do at the outset is just to provide a little bit of background, both about Toggle as well as myself, so that you know what angle and kind of what dimension we're approaching all of this from. My background, as Cynthia already mentioned, is in investment management. I started at Duquesne Capital managing global macro portfolios with Stanley Druckenmiller, and we always took a very discretionary approach. It was not a machine-driven algorithm that we would be relying on. It was doing a lot of manual analysis, trying to sift through a lot of data and really trying to understand what might be driving a particular asset, be it a currency or a fixed income instrument or a single stock and so on. And we constantly face the challenge of how to extract these insights from a growing mountain of data in a timely manner. So this ended up being a theme throughout my career, also later on at Lombard Odier with my co-founder, Giuseppe Sette, who is not on the call today. We continue to struggle with this challenge. And we found ourselves downloading data from a variety of different sources. We were maintaining oodles of macro-enabled spreadsheets and writing ad hoc code to answer questions like, okay, if an election like this happens, what should happen to a variety of different assets? So it really felt like with this explosion of data that was available to us, that we were really sipping from an ocean with a straw. Toggle was therefore really born as a response, or really as an answer to these challenges. We decided that we could really employ a system like Toggle to effectively help us with our discretionary investment approach, rather than to see machines as being just these algos that we competed against in the markets on a daily basis. So in some sense, we started to look at machines really more as complementary rather than a competitive threat to us. When you think about assistants in our daily lives, they seem to be ubiquitous by now. Many of you might have used or continue to use Alexa, Siri, Cortana, and so on. We look at and use Google Maps and then Waze for navigation and so on. So there are already quite a lot of areas where machines have proven themselves to be very useful assistance without taking any agency from the decision makers, which is us. So why don't they exist in investing? If you think about what machines are really good at, there are a number of things that we can probably agree on, which is they are very good at monitoring and processing large amounts of information. They can uncover very quickly price patterns in assets around events like earnings or data changes, for example, the unemployment rate coming out at a surprising level and so on. Moreover, they can take these hypotheses and they can test each relationship for robustness really, really quickly. And finally, they're able to process this large amount of analysis and yet deliver only a handful curated insights to a specific user. So they really can best be thought of as a productivity tool. And it's in this light that I want to deliver the webinar today, to kind of try to convince you that machines can be an incredibly, incredibly useful tool for any individual trader who is out there trying to find the next best investment idea. Now, how and where does a machine fit into a process? Obviously, there are a range of different investors out there. Everybody has a different style. There are technical analysts, there will be fundamental analysts. There are people who rely on both. There are people who might have a combination of quantitative and then fundamental analysis. But the broad idea is that human intelligence is very good at this holistic big picture. So thinking about the strategy. If climate change is a big trend over the coming 5 to 10 years, that's something that a human analyst is very good at sensing the kind of the zeitgeist of the period. But where AI and machines can be very helpful is with the tactics. In other words, is this the moment to get into the stocks that you think are the best expression of this view? Are these the right assets to trade as an expression of this view? So what we have really found ourselves doing, and what Toggle has been doing for us as both professional money managers and now for the thousands of Toggle users, is to, in effect, provide this kind of statistical support that allows an individual trader to think about the exit and entry from a trade, to think about the basket of equities or assets that they want to trade now, and then how to rotate into the next basket or change the components of the current basket and so on. The steps of the process that I'll go through today, where I think machines already can provide invaluable companionship, really breaks down into 4 different categories. The first one, which typically is the most exciting and interesting one, is idea generation. So this is where an investor will ask themselves a question such as, what assets best reflect my thesis? You've done a lot of work. You are now in a position to put some positions and trades on this. Are you sure that you found the assets that will really express that thesis best? In other words, if your thesis proves to be correct, are you going to monetize that thesis? And this seems easier said than done, because there are many examples of traders who have been very correct on the big picture view and yet end up choosing the wrong assets. The second one is hypothesis testing. And this is really this kind of test of hunches and instincts, such as, I've seen this asset break through the 200-day moving average. Is this relevant, and should I now enter into this position because it's potentially a sign of a larger bull market to come? Again, this is somewhere where, as we'll see in a few minutes, machines can be quite helpful because they're able to do some of these tests very, very quickly. The third one is asset due diligence. So you've narrowed down the assets that you think you would like to invest in, but you might be wanting to do that last check. Is there anything that I'm missing? Is there anything about the asset that I have not yet considered? again, this is another area where machines like Toggle can be particularly helpful. Finally, portfolio risk management. The problem that a lot of investors, both professional and non-professional, sometimes have is that they need to juggle both looking for new ideas, but also managing ideas that they have already found. And a lot of times, there is quite a lot of information, a lot of ongoing maintenance that needs to be done here. Do you want to sell at a certain point? Should you get out? You are seeing, for example, earnings analysis coming out about particular asset, and it's suggesting that maybe the stock has run its course. You need to make that decision. Is this the moment to get out, or are they too early in calling the peak? This, again, will be an area where you'll see that machines and intelligent systems like Toggle can really be potentially quite helpful. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to give you some more specific examples of how you could go about all of these 4 different steps by relying on a machine like Toggle, and effectively try and narrow down both the trade ideas and then test their hypothesis and finally manage those trades to really maximum profitability. A few words about Toggle really quickly. Toggle was created last year, so we've been around for just over a year, but we really actually released the Toggle Copilot, which is intended for non-professional traders, a few months back, and we've already seen almost 25,000 people sign up. So it's been indicative of the kind of appetite that I think exists in the market for the supporting infrastructure for the growing cohort of traders that are out there now trading a variety of assets, not only single stocks, but also currencies, fixed income, from time to time commodities, and doing so both in the underlying assets as well as also derivative instruments like options and so on. What I'll show you today is really some of the aspects of Toggle that you could be using on a day-to-day basis also yourselves. Starting with the idea generation, this is just an example of the kinds of headlines that you might be seeing in the news. So for example, please, this is completely arbitrary. There's no reason to think that this is necessarily applicable just to Canadian investors, but just to give you a sense, let's say you're looking and reading about inflation news, and in particular, you're finding that actually inflation, in this case in Canada, has been quite weak. In fact, it's been weakening to a point where it's now at historical lows in terms of negative surprises on this indicator a number of months in a row. And so as you think about this environment, you might be thinking, well, what are the kinds of assets that are going to do well or poorly in this environment? So what I'm going to do now is I'll actually walk you exactly through an example of how we would practically narrow down the scope of assets that might be applicable in this sort of environment. And again, Toggle is meant to complement the work and the thinking that you are already doing by simply making a lot of the analysis that you would presumably already do much, much faster. So what you're seeing here is the front page of Toggle. This is our Explore feature. In the Explore feature, the system is highlighting the most recent analysis that it had done. And so you can see here that it's analyzed almost 1 million variables, and that it's produced just today 850 new insights almost across about 13,000 assets that we cover. Now, of course, that's way too much to sift through in one sitting, and that's not the point. The point really is to now give you a tool where, starting with the headlines that we just saw, you're able to now narrow down some of the ideas that you think could be an expression of this. And so in this case, we'll say, well, we only care at the moment about Canada. So we narrow it down to Canadian assets. Let's say we narrow it down to equities. And then we ask the system, tell us only about the insights where it's the changing macro picture that is the driver for an insight. And I'll explain in a little bit more detail what an insight actually means as soon as we narrow this down. So I select macro picture. let's say that I further narrow this down also to materials, just so that we have a few different specific stocks to talk about. And so now you can see that the system has basically said, okay, well, I will now show you only those assets that fit the criteria that you have selected, and where that in those criteria, the driver of potentially future bullish action is the changing macro picture. So here you can see that actually it's exactly what we had been talking about, which is the system has noticed that the Canadian City Inflation Surprise Index is near lows, and in the past this has led to an increase in Yamana gold price. Conceptually, this might make sense. Inflation is low. Maybe if inflation were to turn up from here, people will take another look at things like gold, although lately Bitcoin seems to have been all the rage, and therefore invest in stocks like Yamana that own gold assets and mines. Now let me click on this so that you can actually have a sense of what a machine is able to actually do for you. So this is the first chart that you would see. What the system has basically done is, on the basis of the analysis that it had done of previous episodes where Canadian inflation had similarly reached low levels, it analyzes behavior of a number of different stocks around those points, and it found that this stock in particular has exhibited very, very bullish behavior subsequently. In particular, over the following 6 months, within this specific confidence interval, this stock has rallied as much as 42%. Now, what does that mean? What the system is really trying to say is it's analyzed a range of different outcomes after each of these previous episodes, and it's concluded that this is the most likely cone within which, if the historical paradigm was to be followed, the stock would stay in. And it also gives you a very quick reminder that if you were to substantially deviate from that point, that this is where you must then consider the paradigm to have been broken, and that something else is presumably driving the price. Now, if we go a little bit lower down here, you can see immediately that these are some of the other episodes that the system had analyzed. Now, City Inflation Surprise Index, just for anybody who's not familiar with this metric, is really just an index that is trying to see whether or not the most recent inflation readings have been higher or lower than expected. And driven obviously by the dramatic economic slowdown that we have seen, current negative surprises on that indicator have been very comparable to some of the other bad periods in the past, including the global financial crisis in 2008, but also some of the previous cases. And what it's noticing is that in the aftermath, this particular stock has actually often had quite a good run. And so this is what the system is very, very quickly highlighting for an individual trader. And so you can see how we went from talking and discussing headlines to immediately having a very, very concrete asset to potentially include in the portfolio. Now, of course, I gave you an example of this stock, but there are any number of these tech resources. There's also Methanex and so on. So there are any number of assets that you would then be able to take a look at and decide whether or not that might be a better fit for your portfolio. And again, as you can see for all of these, the framework is very much the same. All of what you see here has been written up by the system. It's been analyzed by the system, and it's really giving you an immediate leg up in terms of catching up on what inflation means for this particular sector in the past. I won't necessarily bore you to tears with the level of detail, but just to give you a sense, it also displays all of the other horizons so that you can see how the stock might have behaved also over the shorter horizons. But the point is that the relationship was strongest, the relationship between low inflation and subsequent price action at the 6-month horizon. Finally, there's also a series of backtests that the system will do so that you can actually see how relevant and how robust this is we try to encapsulate much of that in this quality checklist where we look at things like the attractiveness of the risk reward. In other words, how much would you have lost if in the past when the system was wrong versus how much you would have earned when it was right? Has it appeared consistently through the different business cycles and so on? And all of these have these kinds of tooltips so that it explains a little bit also about the specific categories that we're talking about. Now, let me switch back a little bit to this screen here because I want to stay on topic, but I don't want it to be only with the kind of the change in macro picture. Another kind of headline that you might have seen would be talking about rotation that could be imminent. Specifically, growth stocks have been all the rage, but perhaps this is the moment where investors might want to look into value stocks again. And so as an individual investor, you might think, okay, well, I've been the beneficiary of the rally in the likes of Netflix, Zoom, in fact, the entire FANG complex. But if there is a rotation, what kind of stocks should I be looking at? And here again, what you can do within the system like Toggle is to simply go back to that screen where we were before. I'll clear the filters. And now you might say, okay, let's focus on the US this time. Let's now actually look at things that have cheap valuation, and I only want to look at, let's say, real estate. And so now the system is, again, once again, immediately narrowing down this more, let's call it, big picture idea of rotation down to specific stocks that currently appear undervalued and could be part of this rotation into more cyclical stocks. And again, I chose real estate, but you could also potentially pick something like industrials. And so then you have a combination of both industrials and real estate. And all that's left to do is looking at the pattern and the star rating is for you to scan through some of these possibilities and potentially decide, let's say we look at Care Trust, that this might be an interesting point potentially to consider this stock. So this is an example of a company that, this is a REIT, that has seen its PE at a level, as you can see down here. Well, this is actually a little bit hard to see because the chart is quite small, but effectively when the valuation as measured by PE had reached these levels, that actually historically the stock had done quite well. And so again, what Toggle is highlighting for you here is really saying, aha, this is what, based on valuation alone, you might expect the future path to look like. Now, this is not taking into consideration things like when will vaccinations begin or whether or not, the election was a fraud and so on. So a number of other things that an analyst will have to still take into account, but it does give you a very succinct point of view with robust analysis to accompany it on the valuation aspect of this stock that can complement all of the other work that you might then do on this particular stock. So again, then on the side, the system will also highlight some of the other stocks that you might look at that might similarly be undervalued and so on. But this is an example of where, as part of this idea generation, the system can really be your friend and help you navigate the absolutely massive universe of assets that you could consider investing in. Now, another thing that investors often have to do is hypothesis testing. So, you are looking at, for example, a particular asset. Maybe it's the S&P 500, maybe it's an individual stock. And so you might ask yourself, I think the economic situation might have this kind of implication for the S&P 500. I suspect this is what the S&P 500 will do subsequently. Am I right? Now, you could conceivably write your own code to test this or download the data into the spreadsheet. But here again, Toggle tries to make this really easy for you. And we do this in the feature called Analytics that is, in effect, think of this as being a data science workbench. So all of the data science that goes into producing the insights that we just saw is opened up to you here, where you can then ask your own questions. And let's just continue with the topic that we had discussed now. Let's say that I that I simply plot the price of the S&P, and I ask myself, okay, let's say that I want to look at the economic, situation, and specifically the fact that the economic situation has been deteriorating here for quite some time. And so all I need to do, and all the toggle requires me to do, is really just highlight this bit that I'm interested in. And I tell the system, I want you to analyze what happens to the S&P 500 when we've seen a similar decline of the Citi Economic Surprise Index, so that the economic situation, after improving for a while, has recently been deteriorating again. And you click confirm, and now what the system is going to do is very quickly highlight that whilst there might be some near-term downside risk, that actually you would expect broadly the path to be moving forward. Now let's take a look a little bit at what's going on here. If I click on the 5 years, actually let me look at the max, it shows you that there have been two other periods where the situation was quite as dynamic as it is now, and this was around the European financial crisis and the global financial crisis. I apologize here, we are still working on the Zoom feature, and so you may not be able to quite see this precisely, but we give you the dates as well. And so what really the system is highlighting here is that there is some near-term downside risk to the S&P, but that typically at this point you were nearer the end of the crisis than to the beginning. And so this was not necessarily a reason to short the market, but it certainly might have been the reason to be cautious and potentially wait for a better entry point. A similar exercise, but maybe moving away a little bit from the macroeconomic theme, could be done with, let's say, an individual stock. So let's take Tesla in this case. Let's take Tesla and let's say valuation, since that has been the subject of some discussion, even by the founder himself. And so if I look at the valuation of Tesla currently, what I might ask the system to plot for me is, let's say that I was over here thinking, should I be buying Tesla? And so I'm purposefully doing it back here so that you can see what the system would have told you back here and what subsequently happened. So I highlight just this point, and now I choose level because I'm actually interested in specifically this level of PE. What does this mean for the Tesla price going forward? And as before, I click confirm, and so now the system is actually plotting out the path that's based on, again, the previous episodes that the Tesla stock has had. And you can see there have actually been other episodes where the valuation was similarly extreme, but what it's also apparent, and perhaps this was not necessarily the example I've picked, because Tesla stock really has been going from strength to strength, but you can see how closely until the most recent rally, the price action subsequently actually mirrored the trajectory that the system has highlighted. So there's definitely at least a way to get a little bit of guidance from the machine based on this past data as to what the kind of central scenario could be for a stock like Tesla. And of course, the quality of the projection is extremely dependent on the amount of data that you have. So whilst we're able to do this for Tesla, it would be much better for stocks that have even longer history. And conversely, it will be particularly weak for stocks that might have just IPO'd 6 or 12 months ago, because the system simply doesn't have enough of these past episodes to study. Let me switch back, excuse me for toggling, no pun intended, between these two screens, but I just want to go back to the presentation to stick with the plan. Now, we've covered idea generation, and we've covered hypothesis testing. The third step, where I thought you might really appreciate the assistance of a system like Toggle Copilot, is the asset due diligence. And so this is the point where you've now identified the asset you want to invest in. but you might actually want to check whether or not on any of this number of dimensions, Toggle covers both fundamental as well as technical data and day-to-day price data, are you potentially missing something? And so as I switch back to the other screen, let's now simply enter, can stay with Bitcoin since with this, let me go to this bit, we just enter Bitcoin. And now what the system does is it pulls together a number of these insights that it has generated for Bitcoin over the past months. And it also gives you the most current snapshot of some of the most key variables that a lot of investors typically look at. Where are you in the price range? Obviously, Bitcoin quite near the highs. Where are you on valuation? Not necessarily applicable in this case. Momentum, economic growth, and so on. And you can actually deep dive into all of these and actually see where some of the other horizons for momentum are as well. You can also, for example, take a look at the financial conditions and what they might seem. We even take into account geopolitics and so on. So the data that you see here is quite ordinary data. This is not about saying we have data nobody else has. Quite to the contrary. We have data that you already have at your disposal, but we try to help you leverage it better. So this is really about very ordinary inputs, but very extraordinary outputs and insights that the system is trying to generate in order to kind of complement your asset due diligence. And what you can see here is that the system has been highlighting quite a lot of very bullish pressure for Bitcoin all the way up here. And so if I click on any of these, you can get the detailed insight that was highlighted here and gives you a sense. You can see here how the potential for the price was seen from the point of view of Toggle. You can do this for anything. For example, I did Bitcoin, but you could also do commodities. So for example, I don't know if there are any commodity traders on the call, but as you can see, the system again looks at momentum in things like natural gas. It looks at technical analysis and so on. So there are any number of assets that the system is able to cover, and again provide this kind of a quick mosaic that it puts together for an individual user, where you're able to assure yourself that you really aren't missing something, some critical piece of information that might have led you to potentially make the wrong trade. And this is again part of this strategy versus tactics. You are in charge deciding the strategy. So energy, renewables, for example, might be something you really strongly believe in, but you rely on a system like Toggle to help you with the tactics, when to get in, how to get out. One of the things that I think is quite helpful to a lot of the users is to have this kind of a quantitative framework where you're able to really see when you might be wrong and should consider getting out from a particular trade. So if you happen to agree in our bearish natural gas, if you start to see price diverge really meaningfully from this level, you're able to very quickly react, close the trade, and sure, you close it with a loss, but it was a minimal loss, as opposed to still wondering, well, you know, maybe we're not yet at a high, perhaps I should wait, and if we really meaningfully break through this level, this is when I get out and so on. No, the system clearly tells you that based on this particular analysis, that these are the kind of meaningful contours of the path paradigm that it's following. I'm gonna switch again to this screen to cover the last step before we open it up to questions. And this is the risk management part. And this is often the trickiest part for any portfolio manager, because it's quite exciting to find a new idea, but it can be a bit of a drag to stay on top of those ideas and really do the maintenance. But it's just as important as idea generation, particularly because having an idea is one thing, but then monetizing is what risk management is all about. And so here again, we find that a lot of times having assistance from a system like Toggle that is able to in real time monitor all of your positions can be really, really valuable. So what we have as another feature inside toggle is this ability to connect your portfolio very quickly through interactive brokers, and effectively the system just automatically loads all of your positions. So what happens in this case is that the system will alert you whenever there is an insight that is being produced, particularly around the position that you have, that maybe you need to think about potentially getting out of that position, or perhaps you should even be adding to the position. For example, you look at something like, in this case, Sun Communities. The system might be saying, aha, there's actually quite a bit more upside in this case, because actually analyst expectations have improved for this stock, and historically that has been tied to a subsequent rally in the stock. So as with idea generation, it really gives you that kind of tactical component where in one single screen, you're able to quickly see which of your positions require immediate attention, and whether or not that attention is about removing the stock from the portfolio. It doesn't have to be a stock. You can have currencies, you can have indices, and so on, or if it's potentially even adding to that position. And as you can see also from these categories, it covers technical analysis, sentiment, momentum, economic growth, entry levels, and so on. So this is that fourth step of the analysis, or of the investment management, that again we find that for individual traders is often really hard to find when you're having to do it potentially by relying on an Excel spreadsheet and so on. I'm going to move for one last time to the presentation, because I think we've kind of covered all of the key areas, and I would encourage you to try and take a look at Toggle and see whether or not it could potentially fits your investment process. But for now, let me close here and just open it up for questions in case there are any. Cynthia, I hand it over back to you.
Okay, well, Jan, thank you very much. And Jan will, there are some questions that I see have come in through the questions panel, but if you do have any questions for Jan, now is the time to go ahead and add those into that panel. Now, also, what I would like to do is I'm going to grab the controls back for just a moment and take you to the Interactive Brokers website. Let me simply, grab my controls, and notice I am going to take you to the Interactive Brokers website. So notice here, you'll see the home page. I do want to show you where you can access some additional information and actually even try Toggle out for yourself. Now notice from our website, if you go to the pricing menu here, you'll find research and news section. You can scroll down to locate Toggle, which is there alphabetically, but I've actually brought this page up. Now notice on here is where you can get some, wait a minute, let me go. This is the page that I wanted to take you to. You'll see here that Toggle information is available, and notice that the Copilot is free for a certain period here today. So it is available to all of you. If you want to access Toggle, notice that you can do so from within the trading platform, but it is a third-party tool. Now, first of all, I do want to take you to the Learn More section here, which is where you can find Toggle information and actually even view their website. To register or to subscribe to Toggle, notice here there are instructions that are included right at the top of the page. You can do that through your client portal or account management system. So I did want to point that out. It is available now, so do check out Toggle. Now, what I will do is let's take this back over to Jan so that he can answer any of the questions that have come in. So back to you, Jan. I'm going to give you the controls once again so that you can share your application. So back to you. I see those questions have come in if you want to take those, take on some of those.
Perfect. I'll do this. Let me just go to, I think I'm not going to need the screen for this, but we have quite a lot of questions, so I'll let everybody know what the question is before answering it. The first question that came in was, what level of increased confidence in the trade is obtained from each increase in a star? This is a very good question. We get quite a lot of inquiries about the quality check that we do on each of the insights. So let me just explain how this basically works. The system operates by looking at a number of really purely statistical metrics to decide on the robustness of a particular pattern, which is, okay, how reliable is the response of the asset to a particular condition. But as an investor and as a trader, you might also care about, well, what is the expected drawdown on the way to that? Is the path really volatile? How much are you expected to make when you're right, and how much are you expected to lose when you're wrong? So we add this overlay of things that we assume portfolio managers, investors, and traders will care about by highlighting each of these dimensions with a star. So it's less to do with increased confidence and more to do with the applicability of the particular insight for a portfolio. And so that's the way to think about this. In other words, an 8-star insight is not necessarily higher confidence than a 6-star. In fact, the 6-star might have a higher accuracy ratio, but it could be that for the 15% gain with 80% accuracy, you may have to endure a 15% correction. That obviously isn't practical, because at the very lows, you might be wondering, maybe this is no longer a trade I want to be in, and you get out. So this is what we try to balance, and in each insight, we actually walk through all of the stars. So please take a look at this, but by all means, reach out if there are other questions on this. The second question was that I logged into Toggle but cannot see the analytics link at the top. Yes, that's correct. We have two different versions of Toggle. There's the Toggle Pro and Toggle Copilot. Toggle Copilot is the free version that is currently available to everybody. Toggle Pro is the version that our institutional users, mostly hedge funds and some sophisticated retail investors, are using. And that one has the analytics button, but we are making Toggle Pro available for a period of time to everybody who has participated in this webinar. So after this, you'll receive a link where you'll be able to log in, and we'll free of charge upgrade you to the Toggle Pro so you can try it. The difference between the two is, as I mentioned, Toggle Copilot is free. Toggle Pro is $100 a month and is used really by some of our most active traders. The second question is, so using this system, it's quite a good question. Using this system, you could become the next Jim Simons. Why would you share it with common folks like us? So this I really want to clarify, because it's an excellent question and it goes quite to the heart of it. Toggle is really a productivity tool. Toggle does not make money on your behalf. In other words, it is not a hands-off system that would look for ideas and then also monetize them for you. It is a system that identifies some really, really interesting relationships that then are shown to you for you to think whether or not that fits into your overall conviction. So it's really, again, all about the tactics and not about the strategy. A place like Renaissance, obviously, which is, for those of you who may not be familiar with this, is where the Jim Simons connection comes from, is very much focused on having everything run by machines. Here, we're trying to focus on longer-term horizons for people who are looking to trade trends lasting for weeks and months, and would like to have a way to curate some of these relationships down into specific assets that they can trade. So again, we are not giving you buy or sell recommendations. We're trying to highlight how changing data landscape might impact a number of different assets. And if that fits into your overall view, hopefully it's timely enough where you're able to put the trade on and also have some safeguards that allow you to know when to get out of the trade, but either profitably or with a minimal loss. Hopefully that answered the question, but if not, please by all means reach out to us. The third question is, why am I not able to see the same version of Toggle that you're showing? Yes, this is going back to the question earlier. Toggle Pro will be made available to everybody on this webinar shortly after the presentation, so you will be able to see the analytics section. The next question is, what's the latency of refresh from brokers into the Toggle platform? So what we currently do is the portfolios get updated once daily. And so if you do a lot of trading intraday, that won't have been reflected until the next day. Again, the idea here is that a lot of the horizon of the insights that Toggle provides is really counted in weeks and months rather than hours. And so for the moment, partly to cut down on the intensity of this kind of connectivity, the refresh is daily. The next question is, what is the difference between the change and level selection in the analytics section? Great question. So oftentimes you might be particularly interested in what is a specific level of, let's say, price to earnings. What is significance of that level for the subsequent price action in the stock? And so you would select that level, click level in the analytics, and so the system then just analyzes similar levels in the past. On the other hand, sometimes you might look at and try to analyze a big sell-off in a stock and want to ask Toggle, when we've had a sell-off of this magnitude, so the change in price, what has typically happened afterwards? And so in this case, you would choose change and ask the system to analyze that instead. That's the main difference between the two settings. And the third one, which we didn't get a chance to get into this time, is also the pattern analysis. Finally, what are the size of the boxes in the same section supposed to indicate? So the size of the boxes is really just the width of the confidence interval. So it gives you a sense of the wider the confidence interval, obviously the wider the range of past outcomes. And so there's more uncertainty about exactly where the price will be subsequent to the chosen condition. I want to know if Toggle would be good to trade agriculture commodities. So this is an interesting question. We have started to cover commodities, and so we are, as I've shown you through the example, already able to cover things like natural gas and a lot of the energy commodities. We have some soft commodities as well. So the answer is already yes, but we continue to expand in that area. So please reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you and find out what kinds of assets you're particularly interested in, and what data you think would also be important to analyze to make sure that we are highlighting the relevant relationships, and we'll see if we can add those in short order. How long have you been testing the analysis result, and what has been the success rate? So we test these on a regular basis, and we've had very, very high success rates. But again, consider that this is not meant to be a buy or a sell engine. What we really test consistently is whether or not the drivers are highlighting directionally relevant moves. So we look at whether or not in the past the intervals that the system was highlighting were broadly in line with what actually happened. Did the price really fall inside that interval? Each of the insights, I should emphasize, is also individually backtested. So on top of the specific wholesale testing that we do regularly to make sure that we continue to add or subtract relevant drivers, each of the insights is very robustly tested, and all of the results are added inside the insight. Could you also elaborate a bit more on the pattern selection? Yes, so the pattern selection is something that I didn't really go into this time, but just briefly, it's the third option in the analytics. Here is where we try to really capture a particular price behavior and see whether or not that has been significant for subsequent price action. This is mostly of interest to technical analysis traders because it typically takes into account things like breakouts. It takes into account a variety of different patterns, such as wedges and so on. That's something that you, in principle, are able to also test inside Toggle. And so, what Toggle does is a type of correlation analysis where it goes back and tries to see when in the past we've had this kind of a similar price action, and what, if anything, I can conclude about the subsequent price action. When do you plan to extend to global stocks? I think right now it's just the US. Actually, no, although we have most comprehensive coverage in the US, we cover a number of Canadian stocks already. We cover a very large number of European stocks, and we have also started adding Korean and Japanese stocks. So we're expanding quite rapidly and definitely plan to cover most of the global stock universe in short order. So if you have specific names that you think are missing, if we have the data, we can add those very, very quickly. So again, please reach out to us and we can definitely add this. And in fact, I see a follow-up question here about Asian stocks. Exactly, this is something that we already have been adding. So you'll be able to see quite a lot of the large cap Japanese and Korean stocks already added to the system. Another question is, I saw that you had Bitcoin as an asset to analyze. How many cryptocurrency assets do you currently cover? Actually, at the moment, only two. We cover Bitcoin and Ethereum, and we cover a number of also different crosses, but we are looking to add others as well. Again, the main constraint here is that we need to have enough data to be able to produce meaningful analysis, because if a coin has been around only for, let's say, 12 to 18 months, there really isn't very much that Toggle will be able to uncover about this, because it's unlikely to find more than a handful past episodes to analyze. So it's very much an evolving area. As you can see, we have actually quite a few prominent Bitcoin investors using Toggle already, but the demand from them is similar to this question, which is to continue to add in this space, and we certainly plan to. So this is the question from the agriculturals. Could we add wheat and corn? Yes, absolutely. We can add this specifically with volatility. Volatility is something we already analyze, and we've had quite good success on that front. We found a lot of assets tend to be very responsive to changes in volatility. So absolutely, this is something that we should be able to add. Is there any possible version of the software available in the web? Yes, in fact, that is currently the only way the software is available. It's available online. You can sign up through either the Interactive Brokers site, as Cynthia had shown, or you can also go to toggle.global and sign up there. We do have a plan for a mobile app later this year or early next year, but for the moment, the way to use Toggle is either on the desktop or also the mobile optimized version that you can use on your phone. I think this exhausts all of the questions. Oh, actually, one last one. What asset classes do you cover? So we cover all of the asset classes: currencies, fixed income, single stocks, as I mentioned, crypto, soft commodities, hard commodities, and so on. We continue to add in each of these classes. So if there's something that you don't or cannot find, please contact us and we'll see whether or not this is something that we should be able to add on your behalf. And I think now I've answered all the questions. So Cynthia, back to you.
Okay. Well, Jan, I want to thank you very much. Interesting and informational presentation. And I'd like to remind everyone that we have been recording today's event. I'll be posting that recording link and a link to today's slides on the Interactive Brokers website. Make sure you check the webinars underneath education. Look for the webinars where you can find the recorded versions and access to today's recording and the same webinar notes from Toggle. So with that, we are going to conclude our event here this afternoon. Thank you all for your participation. You can all exit using the X in the upper right-hand corner of your screen. Have a great day, everyone. We appreciate your interest. Have a good one.